Hello. Today's video is in response to a question I had on how to calculate moving averages on Heiken Ashi values. It's not quite as simple as it sounds, but in the video I cover 3 different coding techniques that you can use to calculate those moving averages. And then I also explain a small problem with the Heiken Ashi, which unfortunately I don't have time to cover today in correcting that, but I will prepare another video where I show you how to fix that problem with the Heiken Ashi if you want to calculate those moving averages. So I'll be right back after the disclaimer and we'll get into the code. Heiken Ashi is a different way of looking at charts intended to smooth out some of the volatility. There is a Heiken Ashi custom indicator supplied with MetaTrader 4. I can just drag that onto the chart here, and this comes with instructions on how to modify the appearance of the chart then to hide the candlesticks to show the Heiken Ashis better. I won't go through that now because I've already set one up, so I'll just cancel this. And here's the chart that I've already set up with the Heiken Ashis. You can see that it's similar to a standard candlestick chart. There is still a body, although it's a little narrow here and harder to see, and there is a wick on each candle. But the values of the open, high, low and close are calculated by averaging in order to smooth out the movements in the market. If I just put both of these charts together so that you can see them. So you can see they're very similar in terms of positive and negative trends, but the Heiken Ashi is a little more smoothed out and takes out things like this big movement that we had on the candlestick chart. And it also retains the upward trend here, where on the candlestick chart we had one negative candle there. So it's just a method intended to smooth out these kind of movements. Let me go back to full screen though. Now the request that I had was to calculate moving average on the Heiken Ashi close. I've got the Heiken Ashi chart here. Let me show the data window. So in the data window you can see there are 4 values with the Heiken Ashi: the low high, high low, open and close. And you may be already aware that you can simply drag the moving average onto an existing chart and select as the input the previous indicator data. So I'm able to do that, but there is no option to select which value from the previous indicator I'm going to use in that moving average. And at the moment it's simply selecting the first value, which is the low high. So there's no way that I can apply this technique to get the moving average of the close value. So I'm going to resort to modifying custom indicators to do this. This is the first option I have for getting a moving average on the Heiken Ashi close. And I can only do this because the close is the one value in Heiken Ashi that doesn't use any of the other Heiken Ashi values in the calculation. So the close value in a Heiken Ashi chart is based purely on the candlestick values. So I've started this simply by using the wizard. I've just created a blank indicator. I've done a little reformatting, but apart from that, this started as a standard indicator from the wizard. First thing to note, this is using the property indicator chart window. I'm setting 2 buffers. One of those will be for the Heiken Ashi close value and the other will be for the moving average. And then I'm simply setting the first color to yellow. This is going to be my Heiken Ashi line. I'm drawing a line and I'm making the style of this a dot so it's easier to differentiate from the moving average that I'll put onto that later. And indicator number 2, color 2, type 2, style 2 and width 2. This is the moving average. I'm coloring that white. It's drawing a line. It's a solid line and I'm making it quite wide at size 4 just so that it's easier to see on the video. Then I have 2 inputs for the moving average, the number of periods to calculate and the method, which I'm defaulting as the simple moving average. And note also I'm using the enum method as the input here. That way in the input box there will actually be some text to indicate which type of moving average you're choosing, rather than set this as an integer and rely on the end user to know what is a simple or an exponential moving average. So then I'm setting up 2 buffers. They're both double values, so there's the moving average buffer and the data buffer, which is where I'll be storing the Heiken Ashi close values. The initialization section on init, very simple. I simply set the index buffer number 0 is my Heiken Ashi data, and index buffer number 1 is the moving average data. Remember, these numbers are offset by 1 from the numbers used here in the properties. So buffer number 0 matches property number 1. Then in the calculate section, this is very simple. This is a standard piece of code to determine how many bars need to be calculated each time. And it's simply determined based on rates total, which is the total number of prices available, minus previously calculated number. So I'm only calculating what has changed. And just to make sure that bar number 0 is always calculated, there's this little condition here: if previously calculated is greater than 0, then I just add 1 to the limit. Then I'm simply looping through for as many bars as I need to calculate, going from limit minus 1, as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, and I'm counting down using I minus minus. So I'm starting the bar to the far left and moving to the right, which is bar number 0. A simple calculation of the Heiken Ashi close. As I said, the close price for Heiken Ashi is based entirely on candlestick values, and it is the open price plus the high price plus the low plus the close divided by 4. And that's why I'm able to do that in this method, because it doesn't use any of the other Heiken Ashi values to calculate the close. So I'm simply assigning that to the data buffer in position I. I have this calculation of range. You may have seen this in some of my other videos. This is because the moving average obviously needs enough bars to calculate a moving average, and in case this is the first run through and we're starting at the far left and I don't have that many bars available to calculate a moving average, I'm just doing this little test. If rates total minus I is less than the number of periods I've selected, then I'm going to change the moving average calculation to just use as many bars as I have, and if I have enough, then I will use the input periods. And then the buffer MA, moving average buffer, I'm using the IMA on array calculation using the data buffer, which I populated here with the Heiken Ashi close. I'm calculating based on the entire array for range, which is the number of bars that I said I'm going to calculate a moving average on. And my method, this is the simple moving average, and I have no shift, and simple moving average, and beginning at position I. And that's it. That will calculate the close value for the Heiken Ashi and the moving average on that close value. And I'm not using any of the other functions that were created by the wizard. I'll just compile that to make sure it does compile. And then I'll move over to the chart to just show you how that looks. So here I've got the Heiken Ashi chart showing. You can see the dotted line, which is going through the closing values on each of these Heiken Ashi bars, and then the heavy white line, which is the moving average of the Heiken Ashi close values. This is the second option that I have for calculating a moving average on Heiken Ashi, and this is going to use ICustom. This is where the question originated based on one of my earlier ICustom videos. So I'm including it here, but I will caution, while ICustom works, no problem with getting the values from this, it may not always be the best option because ICustom does have some performance overhead. And in this case, I think that there are better options. But there is no problem with using ICustom. It's very simple to do and will work and get you a result very quickly. So beginning at the top of the indicator, the usual copyrights, and then again, property indicator chart window. In this case, I only have one buffer because I'm only going to be showing the moving average. I'm not showing the close value in here. Then I'm setting up indicator number 1. It's white, line, solid, and a heavy line again to make it easier to see. I've created this enum because although the question was to calculate based on the close price, now that I'm using ICustom, I can pull in any of the values from the Heiken Ashi indicator. So I've set up an enum to select which of the Heiken Ashi values to use for the moving average. And the main reason for setting up the enum is that then these comment lines will show up as the prompts on the input window to let you select which price you're going to use in the moving average calculation. And now I have three inputs. The first two, the number of periods and the method, are the same as in option number 1. I'm selecting 10 periods and a simple moving average by default. And the third input then is for the input buffer, which I'm defaulting to the close. I have two buffers then to store data, moving average buffer and the data buffer, which is going to store the value from whichever of the Heiken Ashi values that we need. Now, remember that at the beginning here I had indicator buffers 1, and I've just declared two double arrays to use to store my data. So I need to add one more to the buffers, and that's this statement here, indicator buffers 2. So I have a total of 2 buffers that will be storing data, but only one of those will be used in the indicator. And then, as before, set index buffer number 0 in this case is the moving average, and buffer number 1 is the data buffer that I'll be using to calculate the moving average. Then in on calculate, the usual statements here to calculate how many bars I need to process, and if I have already processed some bars, then I'm adding 1 to that limit to make sure that I calculate bar number 0 every time. Standard for loop, looping from the far left, which is limit -1, down to bar number 0, using I minus to decrement that. So then I get the calculation for the data buffer. And in this case, I'm calling ICustom, passing in the symbol and the same period that's on my chart. I'm calling the Heiken Ashi indicator, and I'm passing in the input buffer, which we entered above. And you'll note that I assigned values to these. You can create enums without assigning values. By doing this, I can be certain that the low high is always number 0 and high low is always number 1. Because when I call ICustom, this needs to be a number that can be understood by that function. So I'm passing in the selected buffer and I, which is the bar number that I want the Heiken Ashi value back for. So once I've populated the buffer data, again I have this calculation of range in case I don't have enough bars to do a full moving average, and then I'm simply doing moving average calculation using IMA on array exactly as in option number 1, but my buffer data now has been populated using ICustom. And that is all there is to using ICustom to create a moving average on Heiken Ashi. So let me go to the chart again and demonstrate this one for you. So here I have the Heiken Ashi chart again, showing the Heiken Ashi candlesticks, and this is my 10 period simple moving average on the close. If I change that, just go to our indicator list, I can change this to the open, for example, and we should see that line move. So that's using ICustom. Very simple to do and a little bit more flexible than simply calculating on the close price, because the open price and even the high and low use other Heiken Ashi values in that averaging calculation. So I can be more flexible by using ICustom. For the third option, to create a moving average on Heiken Ashi, I've made use that MetaTrader actually supplies the source code for the Heiken Ashi indicator here. So I've simply taken a copy of that. This is going to be more work than simply using ICustom, but everything will be done inside the indicator. So this is the original MetaTrader Heiken Ashi indicator. I've renamed it to custom here. I should have changed the comment as well. And then let's go through the changes I've made, because they are more complicated than the ICustom method. First, I've increased indicator buffers. So the Heiken Ashi only uses 4. I need 5. That's to create one more for the moving average. And here the moving average properties, this is indicator number 5. Again, I'm coloring it white and I'm making it quite wide so it's easy to see in the video. This is the same enum that I had previously, because I want to be able to select which of the Heiken Ashi values to use for calculating the moving average. These inputs are part of the original Heiken Ashi, and these are my inputs for the moving average periods, method and buffer, the same as for the second option. I added one more buffer, the external moving average. I've used the same naming convention that MetaTrader used for the Heiken Ashi just to make it more consistent. So this is my moving average buffer. Down here, all of these settings I've bundled together the version for the moving average rather than spread them throughout here. So I'm setting the index label as MA, and this is index number 4. Draw begin at 10. Index buffer then is the external MA buffer. Now in the calculations here, I've declared an additional variable for the moving average calculation loop, and we'll see as I scroll down a little further why I need that. Everything else here in this array setter series, if previously calculated, all this is done as part of the standard Heiken Ashi indicator from MetaTrader. Now there are two locations in the code where I can calculate the moving average. I've got one here that I've commented out where I'm calculating the moving average inside the main processing loop. So after all of the calculations have been done to get the buffers for Heiken Ashi calculated, then I have a block of code here. Now the Heiken Ashi calculations, if you go to the beginning of the loop, which is here, you can see that they're using I++, and that's why there is this array setter series false above. MetaQuotes are calculating by incrementing the counter with I++, where in my previous examples I was decrementing with I-. So I'm counting from right to left normally. This is counting from left to right. So it makes this code a little different to the earlier examples. I still have to calculate my range of values that are available. But in this case, it's simply I is less than input periods rather than rates minus I. So this is the same calculation to get the same value that I'm going to be using in the moving average calculation. But then I'm using this IPOS because I'm not reversing the order of my moving average buffer. So IPOS is simply creating the opposite of the value that is in use by the Heiken Ashi calculations. Then, because I could be working on any one of these 4 different options, I actually have to use a switch statement because I then have to have a separate IMA on array function depending which buffer I need to feed in. But otherwise, this is the same IMA on array that I've used previously. I'll just scroll across a little. So that's the buffer that I'm using in the moving average, the range, the method that I'm using to calculate, and IPOS, which is the position that I'm trying to read. And I'm assigning that to this XMA buffer in the position. Now I'm not actually using that. I have a separate calculation here outside the main loop. So the main loop terminates there. And then I'm initiating my own loop. And in here, this is much more similar to the earlier examples. I'm calculating my limit, which is the number of bars that I need to calculate, same as before. And I'm still calculating IPOS, or I'm still using IPOS in the loop, mainly to keep this code the same as the code above. But this is similar to my earlier examples now. I'm using minus minus to decrement the operator, so I'm counting from limit down to 0. My range calculation then is the same as the earlier examples because now I'm looking at rates total minus IPOS being greater than or less than the number of periods that I need, and then I'm calculating how many values I have available for moving average calculation. Then these lines are the same as above, so this is still a switch statement because I still need to determine which buffer I'm going to calculate, and they're identical to the lines above. The reason that I have moved this code out to a separate loop here is for performance reasons. It seems counterintuitive that it would be faster to code this in a separate loop compared to using the existing loop. But in my testing, I found that on the first pass, where we're calculating a lot of bars, it was a noticeable delay to have the code here inside the main loop compared to here. And while I don't have a definitive answer for the reason behind that, my test seems to indicate that IMA on array is very quick to recalculate new values if the underlying data doesn't change. So in this first example, if X to close buffer, if the values in that don't change and all I'm doing is calling IMA on array using different positional values, then it's very quick. But if the data in the underlying array changes, then IMA on array somehow reinitializes and it's slower each pass. In the main loop then, because these underlying buffers are changing every pass through the loop, it means that IMA on array is slower to calculate here than it is in this section. So it's actually faster to have a separate loop which waits until all of these other buffers are filled before I then calculate the IMA on array values for the XMA buffer. So that's a modified version of the Heiken Ashi indicator, which also means that I don't need to separately load the Heiken Ashi indicator. If I load this indicator on the chart, I get the Heiken Ashi plus the moving average. So let's go to the chart now and see how that looks. So this is the modified Heiken Ashi indicator with moving average. This heavy white line is the moving average based on the Heiken Ashi close values. If I just go to the indicator list, Heiken Ashi custom, I'll just change that to the open price, for example. And there we see the line moved. So it's calculating that moving average based on the selected price. Now, before I finish, I just want to explain one problem with the Heiken Ashi. And there is a fix for it, but this video is becoming a little long, so I'll actually make a second video to show you how to fix this problem. And I'll remove my Heiken Ashi indicator first. And I'll just then load up the example from MetaQuotes, Heiken Ashi. All right. Now, if I move my mouse, the values in the data window change. So if I hover over this bar, for example, you can see that the low-high value is 1.17786 and the high-low value is 1.17977. So the low-high is the low price. If I then move to the next bar, which is a downward bar or bearish bar, you can see that the low high now is 1.17994 and the high low is 1.17645. So the high low is actually the low price here. That's done because MetaQuotes have had to code this so that we get different colors of these candles depending whether the price is moving up or down, which means that on an upward bar, the low high is the low price and the high-low is the high price, where on a downward bar those two are reversed, and that's how the color changes happen. So that can be modified and fixed. The effect that it has is that if you use those moving averages and you try to calculate a moving average on the high price, there is no single value for high because it will switch depending whether the bar is a bullish or bearish bar. As I said, we're kind of out of time in this video, but I will prepare a second video which will come out very quickly to show you how you can further modify the Heiken Ashi indicator to get true high and low values. So that's the end for this video. 3 different techniques that you can use to calculate moving averages on Heiken Ashi values. There are more options available, but I think those 3 will satisfy almost any need you might have for calculating the moving average here. I hope this has been useful to you. If it has, please leave a like. If you would like to see more videos like these or know when the next video is coming out, then remember to click the subscribe button, and if you click the bell icon, then you'll be notified when we release more videos. So until next time, thank you for watching.